So let's move on talking more about functions, context, and another addition, variable environments. Here's another phrase that's used when talking about JavaScript under the hood. It's a lot more complicated sounding than it really is. Variable environments? Well, big word alert. The variable environment is just talking about where the variables live that you've created and how they relate to each other in memory. So when you think about the variable environment, just think about where is the variable. Let's move on from there. Let's look at a piece of sample code. Again, I have two functions, a function b and a function a. Inside function b, I declare a variable called myVar and don't set it equal to a value. In function a, I set a variable called myVar also and set that equal to 2. And then outside the functions, I also declare a variable called myVar again and set that equal to 1. Then a is called, and inside a, b is called. So what's going to happen? What is the value of myVar at any point in time? To answer that, we need to think again about execution context. What's happening as these functions are invoked? So, at first, what happens? The global execution context is created, and so that bottom myVar is put into memory space. In the case of the global execution context, its variable environment is the global object, or a window in a browser. So then the code is executed, and that memory space will get a value of 1 when it hits that myVar equals 1 line. And then it hits the invocation of a. And what happens? A new execution context is created for a. And when it's created, that myVar will be put into that execution context variable environment. See, every execution context has its own variable environment. And its value will then be 2 during the execution phase when that line myVar equals 2 is run. Then it invokes b, and a new execution context with its own variable environment, its own memory space for its variables, is created. And since it's not set equal to a value, myVar will be put into memory with a value of, as we've learned before, undefined. This has to do with something called scope. Just means where are we able to see the variable. Each variable that we are looking at is defined within its own execution context because it's within a function. And every time you call a function, you get your own execution context. So even though the myVar is declared 3 times, they're distinct, they're unique, and they don't touch each other. All right, let's prove that. I've put my code into a JavaScript file, and I've added some console.logs so we can see the values. So we set myVar equal to 1, log it, then call function a, which will create a new execution context on the execution stack on top of the global execution context. So this will be the running code. It will create myVar in its own variable environment, log it, and then we start another execution context by invoking a function, and it will put its own variable called myVar into its variable environment, and we'll log that. So what should you expect to see? Well, we're going to expect that we'd see this console.log happen first. It runs A, so we'd see this one second, and then it runs B, so we'd see this one third. So I should see 1, 2, and what will be the value if I haven't set a value? What value does the execution context creation phase set all variables to? That's right, the special value, undefined. So I should see 1, 2, undefined. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this and open up the developer tools, go to the console and look. 1, 2, undefined. Exactly as we expected. So each of these myvars is sitting in its own execution context. Calling this function didn't affect this myvar. Watch, I'll console.log myvar after calling A. Should that have an impact? The answer is no, because once we finish A, we're now the currently running code is the global execution context where myvar is 1. So I should see another 1 when I console.log here. Let's say that again. This code is running inside the global execution context. These variables are attached to the variable environment of the global execution context. So when I log this, I see a 1. This calls, and this runs, and that's its own execution context with its own variable environment. The same with B. So when I leave B, A finishes. And when A finishes, I'm back to the global execution context because the B and A execution contexts have been popped off the stack. They're gone. The currently running context is the global execution context. And what was myvar in that context? 1. So I'll save this, run it. What should I see? That's right. 1, 2, undefined, 1. See that? 1, because that's inside the global execution context. 2, because that's inside A's execution context. Undefined, because that's inside B's execution context. And then 1 again, because we're back to running inside the global execution context. Got that? Does it make sense? Try this code out for yourself. Mess around with it a bit. See if you understand it. Remember, this is important. And as we move on, if you've got this concept down, it will reveal another concept that's interesting, fundamental, and often causes confusion. But you are going to understand it. Let's move on.